On and really excited to host everyone after an hour, a little over an hour of just absolute inspiration. And so I'm going to take a lesson from what we just heard on our panel and start with a little bit of gratitude and celebration of those small wins. And so as I think about the last hour, I think about the power of being able to connect people with the brain trust that we just heard, because before COVID, I would have never produced an event and said, oh, hey, let's use Zoom or WebEx or Microsoft Teams and let's bring people in remotely. And if we had the best speakers, but they couldn't be there in person, we're like, oh, we'll find the next best. Well, we don't need the next best anymore. And the fact that we can still connect, that I can gain energy from that chat, where I can meet someone, send them a message, and connect in a deeper way where I couldn't have done that if I was sitting in a keynote. I wouldn't have had that opportunity. So I'm practicing that gratitude moment of what is possible and how technology is changing. But I'm also super excited to be joined by Will. And for us to have this quick little debrief, we were actually chatting about entrepreneurship and some of our early stage stories. I started my first company when I was 18, so a little bit after Will. And I was actually a street racer, and I was involved with helping to promote the Fast and the Furious movies up and down the West Coast when they first came out. So I think Will and I have both been entrepreneurs for quite a while and seen a lot of change through our careers. But Will, as you think about this morning, what was the most interesting takeaway that you had? I mean, first of all, I know that you are a meeting planner because you can speak, you can manage the chat and a Google Doc all at the same time. So I already know that your brain is working a million miles a minute, but what did you take away from this morning?
Yeah, no, thanks so much, Allie. Well, first of all, too, because I haven't gotten a chance to do this publicly yet, congratulations so much. It's so exciting what you guys have going on. And just congratulations to you as from one entrepreneur to the other. And yeah, it's really funny. Also a fun fact, I love fast cars too. So you and I really need to talk about racing a little bit more. So I was actually, everyone's making fun of me about being so quiet during the panels because I was listening and I was like, hey, I just got done talking. I want to hear what these guys have to say. But one of the biggest things I think that I took away from this was this idea that we were kind of, I guess, my theme that I was going with, but then reiterated across, I think, all the different panelists was this idea that, Albert Einstein said, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and again and expecting different results. Right. And the thing that I heard from everybody, like from Dan saying, hey, we really need to focus on our buyer personas. And if you don't know what a buyer persona or attendee persona is, I'll put a link in the Google Doc for you all as well. But you really have to focus on your attendees and then think about how you're going to do things differently for them. And then I really loved when Jen said, meet me where I am too, because we think so often about how we force people into these boxes and where you need to go. And I'm expecting this of you. I mean, that's probably something no one ever talks about is how meeting planner to attendee expectations. We always talk about attendee to meeting planner expectations, but sometimes I think we force everybody into this round hole when they're a square peg. And so I think there's this opportunity for us to really do things differently and look at wholeheartedly all of what the attendee is all about. And, take a stab and try to do something different.
Yeah, it's interesting, over my career, when I started my career in meetings and events, fax machines were tech, right? So things have changed quite a bit since then. But I think the biggest learning for me over the last year and a half has been when I produced an event, I did have that meeting planner to attendee expectation of I'm going to plan these specific things happening at this hour. I'm going to funnel people in this way, and they're going to do exactly what I say the entire time, right? And the reality of that was that I didn't have the digital tools or the budget to be able to track where people were at all times. So it would be this gut feeling of being in the convention center and watching where people were and what they were doing, but I didn't have the real data. But what I did know is that not every person attended the keynote. And not every breakout was sold out. And so I would always scratch my head and think, okay, in lieu of having data, how do I watch this and change it? And as we think about the digital environment that we've had, one of the blessings with that is the data. But the problem is that we argue with the data because we feel like we're failing. Because if someone doesn't attend something, it's something we did to not create the right experience. And I think we need to flip the script on that sort of thought process to say, actually, what this is telling me is what people truly care about. And how do I relate that back to the personas and to the experience to actually create relevant experiences as part of my event, instead of saying, oh, I didn't have the right content or I didn't have the right, maybe people don't care about that. Like Dan's point was, people are in live events are not going to be in the session rooms. They want to network, they want to connect because they haven't been able to do that. And so we just need to think about how we're doing things in a completely different way and stop sort of the type A, which I totally am, type A control over, I didn't do a good job.
Totally. Well, it's funny because let's put another science metaphor. I feel like I just tend to do this nowadays is a bad scientist is someone who sits here and gets all the data and does an experiment and tries to fit the data to get to the conclusion they need to be. I'm sure there's some actual term for what that is, the idea of some bias when it comes to it. But we need to avoid that bias and just totally let our egos go and say, yeah, wow, that didn't work. Let's try something else, And what I think is funny is that also one thing that we need to consider too is that, a scientist also gets a large data set. Sometimes we sit here and go, well, that didn't work. Well, maybe you want to try to say, hey, I tried this session at this time. Maybe I should try it at a different time. But I think definitely, like you said, let the ego go, let the data tell what we need to do. And especially because now we have so much more technology to be able to do this than ever before. I was so excited at the beginning of the virtual events revolution because, before, if we wanted to track where people were in the rooms, who they were meeting and everything like that, we spent a lot of money. There was probably maybe 3 tools in the events industry that really did it well, or you had to concoct something on your own. But now it's we've the ability to track where people are on websites have existed in Google Analytics since 2001, something like that. So I think that we have this ability to get so much more data now. And I agree, let's let the ego go and let's think like scientists and think about how we can make our events better.
Yeah. And since this is a behind the show type of experience for you and I, one of the things that I think about is I'm all in. However, when I'm triggered personally and professionally, it's really hard for my brain to absorb new ways and for me to feel like I've got the energy to fail and to learn from it instead of just saying, screw this, it's too hard. And one of the things that strikes me from today is I feel like a lot of the messaging is exactly the same as what it was a year ago. And I think everyone got this thought process of, okay, vaccinations are going to hit. I'm going to be able to get back to what I know, to the point of what we heard earlier of the only thing we know is that the playbook is different. But I think a lot of us, especially in a high stress job and with a lot of high stress personally, we want to go back to what we know. And so I'm interested, Will, for what you've had to do. You're on a public stage all the time. You've got a lot changing. Also for myself, I don't know what the heck is going on. I have to figure it out just like everyone else, right? And so how do you take care of yourself and how do you open yourself up to have that scientist mindset, especially coming from that type A, I like to have a plan and execute and do things well?
Yeah. I'm, if you know disc theory, I'm a high D. The I barely goes above it, which is why I'm so interpersonal with other people. The D is pretty high. I'm pretty dominant on how I want things. But, one thing I think that when I try to think about it, I actually jokingly say that, I'm afraid to almost look back at my content from a year ago because I probably am now contradicting myself in what I said then. And I think that you constantly need to be willing to shift where you're going and be open to get new data, new thoughts, new ideas. But one thing I think that I've held consistent is that exact idea that everyone thinks it's this point A to point B to point C. And we're back to where events were before. And I think we almost felt that in January as we started to see vaccination rates spike up. And I don't know about you, but in April, May or so, everyone's like, all right, cool. I'm going to start booking all my festivals I'm going to go to. I'm going to go to this conference. And then by now we're well, maybe I have to rethink this all again. But I think the thing that we ultimately really need to stick to is that understanding that while you see people like me and Allie on stage, you said it yourself, is we look like we all have it together. Everything's perfect. Right. And it's almost this innate idea that's been ingrained because of social media. Right. We see these perfect worlds, perfectly curated worlds where everything's going well. You see endless events is growing, but my company, is kind of having some struggles. Every single person here is having the same struggle, not necessarily the same struggles, but having struggles. And you have to recognize that not everyone has it together 100% perfect. And don't ever compare yourself to someone else to say, well, oh man, but they got it this way. They were, they were able to do in person. Why can't I? That's stressful. Oh man, they were able to do this. And I think far too often we go into this comparison mindset and it's really, really dangerous. And what I think is really much more important is, as I talked about on the panel, is take a second to think, be by yourself. And I think sometimes the best ideas or the best decisions I made in strategy are because I've really taken a second to decide, this is what I want. And I used to have one, go back to the early entrepreneur journey, is that when I used to sit down with mentors, I was very much growing my company while I was in college. And I was a part of these entrepreneurship programs that constantly paired you with mentors. Like people have run much bigger companies than I ever will. People who, had been doing this for so long, accountants, finance people, marketing people, and everyone would give you advice. And I learned really quickly is that you can't just immediately take that advice and then implement it today. And I'll say it's even with Will Curran's advice. You can't always just take what Will Curran's going to say. But instead, what I used to do is I heard it 3 times. That's when I would implement. And I think that allows us to get the focus that we talked about on the panel of saying no. No, 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 no. Yeah, just because Will says, get rid of the catering company, does that work for you? Is that going to work for your event? But the interesting thing is you have to balance it then, because you also have to be open to new ideas, but you also have to know when to say no.
Yeah.
And you're never going to get it perfect, but just try to make that judgment along the entire way, I think.
That's great advice. So much of what I've done over the last year and a half seems almost counterintuitive, but as a meeting planner, I run everything by my calendar, right? I wake up, first thing I do, check my calendar for the day. Usually in today's world, it's back to back, right? Literally 10 hours a day is just back to back meetings. There's no time to actually get anything done and much less time to think. And so what I started to do was actually put into my calendar ahead of time. So now it would be like 8 weeks out that I'm scheduling this, but I would block 4 hours to go hike a mountain. And I would do it on a weekday. I'd start at like 6 a.m. and I would go and I would hike a mountain. I would block things. I would go purposely where I knew that I wouldn't have cell phone reception. And part of that was because I needed time to think. And I couldn't think when I was constantly reacting to other people, helping them, trying to sort of solve issues and emergencies. And so we end up being so reactive. And so I think to tag on to what you're saying, I would recommend just calendar that time and know that it's just as important for the business, not even for you personally, even though it'll benefit you personally. It is so important for the business for you to be able to think freely.
Definitely. I'm a tool monger. So if I can recommend a tool that's helpful too. Also, if anyone goes to the Google Doc, there's a link that says like Will's master list of apps or Will's epic list of apps. It's all the apps I use. So if you like this sort of stuff, feel free to get nerdy with me. But an app that I recommend is called Clockwise. It automatically schedules those blocks of what we call focus time. We call it focus time because that's what they call it. But one thing I've also recognized is not only blocking that focus time and moving meetings around to maximize that focus time. That's what the app does. I also found that we're in this world where everybody's across the entire world. No one knows what time zones they are. Everybody's working at different times now. So one thing I did too is I blocked out my morning routine. So people in my team knew I need my morning to ramp up and slowly get into meetings. And I found that really, really helpful to have that same block time, and also definitely blocking focus time 100%. If it wasn't so hot in Phoenix, I would totally go on a mountain right now.
What I find interesting, Will, about that is that I take it back to how the world is changing. I mean, the fact that we have an app that's going to help us to maximize meetings so that we can have free thinking space, how different is that from what it used to be 5 or 10 years ago? And so I relate everything that's changing in our world to what we need to think about in meetings and events. So if that's what's happening on a daily basis for us, why would we expect that our attendees are going to feel any different coming to an event, digital or in person, right? So there's so much forced innovation happening right now that we have to understand how the world feels and how the world functions. And I hate this because it is 10 o'clock Pacific time, and so we are at our end, but Will and I could probably sit and chat all day long, but I hope that this little behind the scenes look was valuable for all of you. We've got some great workshops that are happening. We've got some incredible coaching opportunities as we sort of build and expand on what Will and I were just talking about. How do we take care of ourselves in this process of change? So please go take advantage. Come back as we talk about Event 365. We're going to be having content ongoing. We've got this studio tour going all across the United States. And this afternoon, make sure that you come back for our closing keynote, because really what it is it is a connection point. It's for each of us to share how we feel, what we need for support, and to lean on the community as we go and change the future of events together. Enjoy the day, everyone.
I could let this out.